Hello everybody. I'm not actually going to read from a script for any of this. I'm kind of just going to freeform it and discuss world building. Well, at least one method. I'm likely going to discuss over a couple of videos a number of different ways of going about it, because I have a tendency of developing things in different ways depending on what I'm working on. Maybe you've been pondering writing your own epic story in a fantasy world, or even this one. Which one? It does not actually matter, and I'll explain why. Yeah, there are some ground rules to this, which I've found useful. I will also explain as I'm going. Though, I probably should put a little disclaimer on it. All of this is how I do things, so don't take this as the way it should be done. As you'll develop your own methods as you work, things that sort of slot for you, and you might take some things from me and some things from somebody else. I mean, it doesn't matter. Whatever actually works for you. Sure, there are those that will tell you it must be done this way, but I was never one for following the flock anyway, so I'm not saying they're wrong. It's just that it's not how I do things. Anyway, I'm going to ignore all the software and writing aids to start with here, as while they're very useful and helpful, they're not actually required, but I'll address them as needed. So, what do you need? Oh, a pen and a notebook, pad, or a wall if you feel like writing on it. That's it. Everything else is just a way to catalogue, develop, or simply streamline the process. It's not actually necessary to have any of the fancy software, although I will insert here that Scrivener is extremely useful for doing this. So if you haven't seen it or haven't used it, you probably want to have a good look at Scrivener. So what I'm saying here is don't get stuck on the software, apps, etc. I mean, they're useful, but not needed to be creative at all. The first thing I have to say about world building is that if you wish to write a story, the basic sketch of the world you want will likely already be in your head, even if you don't know it. Oh, it'll be a fuzzy picture with very blurry outlines, blank spots, and entire regions that are utter voids, but there will be something. Or the idea for the story would not exist in the first place, in my opinion. I mean, think about it. You are a creative person, so the creative processes will already be going on in your brain. You'll be looking at the world and going, what can I do with that? Even if you don't know it. Don't think, I have to develop being a creative person. You already are. I mean, I think almost everybody is in their own way. So what kicks it off? Well, it could be a name, the view remembered from a window, or anything. And often they start as very simple thoughts. Let me explain with an example from my own writing. The seed that grew into what would be the Neververse series came from a conversation I had with Meredith on creative prompts. What is a creative prompt, I hear you say? Don't worry, I will get to that. It is quite important to world dialogue and chapter building, in my opinion. You kind of need to understand how to look at doing it. And I find it extremely useful to get my creative mind working in the morning if I'm stuck for ideas. Anyway, back to the story. I wish I could remember all the conversation word for word, but in short, it was a question on using creative prompts, and she asked, what about that painting? Can you write me a story using that? It was an Edward Manet painting, hanging over the fireplace that birthed the Neververse. In truth, she only expected me to write a short story. Yes, well, about that. It is now a multi-book series with a crossover one attached. Yeah, big oops. All of that aside, the question is, how did that happen? Not the why, because that is the simple thing to answer. I am a writer, and we write about what we see, hear, touch, smell, etc. Well, I suppose I do. Yet, the how is actually quite simple as well, and it is a simple formula you can all follow. Before I kick all this off, I'll do a down and dirty quick synopsis for those who really just want to get to the point straight away instead of listening to the rest of my ramble. A prompt, in this case we're talking about an image prompt, is just something that we use to help get the creative flow started. It can be anything, any image of any kind. It actually doesn't matter, but in this case I'm probably going to work with an image with a person in it. So let's get on with it, eh? Visual prompts are quite good for this, yet I also use a lot of audio and music prompts, which are a little more tricky, and I can explain another time if you wish to know, but the process is not all that different for them either. I just think some people find it a little hard to write to music. As a former musician, I don't actually find it that hard myself, but I think it's because I'm used to it. So, to the method then. Right. Take a picture with a person in it. The scene, in fact, matters little, as it often vanishes into the world building, but take something relevant at first. For example, say you wish to write a story that is a detective romance, then it is best to pick something that gives you that vibe. Or say you wish to write a high fantasy epic, then pick a visual prompt that fits that vibe as well. I mean, all of this is really obvious, but it is what you do with the images that actually matter. With the image in hand, take your time to puzzle it out using these questions. Who is that person? A good first step, because with it comes a name, or not, as I do write characters X, Y, Z now and then if I'm stuck for a name. But a name helps when you're first doing this. I'm trying to create some attachment here. The next question to ask yourself is, why are they in that image, place, or scene? How did they get there? Are they happy, sad, or indifferent to being there? And your answers don't need to be massive sentences. I mean, they can be, I guess, but a lot of time it's just bullet point it and just start to get the idea down in rough form. No novel starts out in a finished form, and it's kind of obvious. They start out as very, very rough pencil ideas that often, you wouldn't want to show anybody. They are complete messes, but there has to be a way of building a framework to begin with, and this is what we're doing with this. And no, I haven't started with maps or visuals of the world itself, and I will get to explaining why very, very soon. Anyway, back to the question, why are they in that image? Grounding them is a good place to start, as it helps you develop the next part. What we are developing here is motivation, emotions, etc. From here, you'll decide if they are the hero, the anti-hero, an antagonist, or, whatever. That happens eventually, yet that is actually not important right now. Well, it isn't for me. As I flesh out personalities to start with, even in a rough form. A hint for those who may have read some of my work, or may not, I hope you do read it, I often end up with characters that are neither the good guy nor in reality the bad guy. I like that ambiguity, and it comes from this way of building a story. A story is about the character, not the environment. That is the backdrop. But it must be a character in its own right. And trust me, this will all make sense in the end. I mean, could you start with a map? Absolutely. Certainly. I have done that. But I found my method works best if I start with people first and not truly defining their role straight away. There are plenty of books on how to develop antagonists, etc. And I'm actually going to talk about how to get the beats correct for antagonists and for your protagonists and the hero's arc and how to integrate that in future videos. Just right now, what I'm trying to do for you now is give you a basis upon which you can build a world to put these antagonists, protagonists, etc. into. So, on to the third question. The past, the present, and the future. Now, this is the big one. And remember, as I said, if you wanted to write a story, you'll probably have an idea, even as a tiny seed that you did not even know of lurk in your mind. And honestly, I can discuss at some point how we actually create those seeds to begin with, but we'll save that for a different video. Anyway, this part is actually the best bit, as you can use the image of the world around the person to build the very first doorway into that world. None of this needs to be fixed, and in fact, it should not be to start with. But I hear you ask, why did we start with a character and not a map? Because you can now see their world through their eyes. For me, this makes things feel more human, even if they are utterly fantastical. Suspension of disbelief and all that stuff. You kind of have to see their world through their eyes, and this is what we're trying to develop here, is what I'm getting at. So, to the first part of this question. The past. Were they born there? Or did they arrive there? Was it willingly or not? Do they have a family? Etc., etc. You can paste a lot of questions on this. Armed with that, look at this image. How do they fit into that image? What are the rules of the world around them? Yes, this is a past question, as presumably the world they are in existed long before they did, and there are rules. Another important development point for me is the world building rules. Now, these will develop and change as the story builds into its very first rough draft. It'll be a messy draft, but you do need some, because you've got to ground your story in some form. It's all fine having fantastical, magical things going on. If you say you're doing a fantasy epic, but if you're actually using magic, they must have grounding rules, or they become some sort of magic bullet that cures everything. And honestly, for me as a reader, I kind of find that boring. Another thing for me where the past question is concerned, it helps you sort of develop where they stand within that world as well. So you create a space in which the character could be, a peasant, a pauper, a saint, a sinner. It doesn't matter, but the world itself will define the rules upon which their lives are dictated by. And this will help you actually develop a story out. Now, I haven't actually talked about story building yet, because we're talking about world building, not story building. And we can discuss how to create the hero's arc and bits and pieces, and how to take a redemption arc, etc., in other videos. Not this one. I'm talking about actually trying to create the world itself, which can be a very free-form thing to do. So, on to the next part of this question, the present. So, where are they now? As we just discussed, I mean, what are they? Are they a saint? Are they a sinner? Are they a king, a prince, a pauper, a thief, some questing knight? It doesn't really matter what you decide they are. The past will define their present now. And something to be aware of here, you do need to create a backstory for every character. And that will be dictated by the world building itself, the world they're in. This is how I work anyway. And just a little bit of note of warning, when you're actually writing in a lot of sort of flashback stuff, or flashback dialogue and stuff when you're writing, you need to make sure that the percentage of it actually is relatively small to the forward movement of the story. Or the story will feel sticky, it'll feel stuck. I feel like we're looking backwards all the time and not looking forward. Anyway, back to the question, the present. So, presumably they have a space in society, and you'll be able to look at the character's world around them through their eyes from their station in life. This is why I do this. And your prompt, the image you're using, will dictate that. So it'll give you an idea of where they are and what part of that image they were. So, I mean, in some respects, image selection may be very important, but I've got folders and folders full of thousands of images I use for doing this. Though, if you haven't signed up with some screensaver sites, are really good places to go. I'm talking about some software here, or maybe some sites. Deposit Photos is excellent for doing this. You can go through and have a good look at different images, some of them real, some of them completely fantastical. It doesn't matter. They're very, very good to pull these in, have a wee folder full of them, and just have a look at a visual prompt. It helps you develop straight away. That's why we're discussing this to start with. Right, now the final bit of this particular question, the future. It's actually kind of a hard one to ask, because you haven't written your story yet. You don't know what's going on. But that's the lovely thing about this. This bit, for me, starts to push me toward, where is this character going? What influences in their society, because presumably you've developed a tiny wee bit of it, is going to push them in a direction. And this will start you thinking. And it's just a chance to start thinking and jotting ideas down as to what their actual mission is, whether they're chasing a MacGuffin of some kind, or they're trying to slay the dragon and save the princess, or the princess is trying to slay the hero and save the dragon. Whatever works. I mean, it doesn't matter whichever direction you're going, but this question is the one that gets you thinking of the future, of where your destination in your story is going to be. I just had a conversation with Sharon, a really good writing friend of mine. Small Magics is a great book, by the way. You should probably look at it. The discussion was on how we actually write some of our work when we're actually starting to rough draft in. And we both tend to write the epilogue of a story first, or the very end of it, and because I need to know where I'm going. And this kind of forces me to develop the characters forward. Now, I am a bit of a pantser, but even saying that I pants my way through, or writing by the seat of my pants, if you've not heard the term before, I still have to tame myself in and synopsis each chapter out, or each sort of crisis point has to be synopsis, or you're just going to be writing yourself in circles. I mean, sure, you can just out there and just write for it and see where it all ends up. I mean, that's interesting, and I have done it. But you end up writing epics that are so big that they are probably unpublishable. So, anyway, now I've got through all of that stuff. Now we can look at this from a very, very useful angle. You can do a prompt for every single chapter in your book to help you develop each one. And it's kind of nice to have a scene which you can look at and go, there's something going on in the scene. This is a sort of feel and vibe I'm after. And I can write that in. I did this for the entirety of the Neververse. I did it for very good most of Queen of Ravens was done this way. Although Queen of Ravens, to an extent, was actually written to music, not so much these visual prompts. I'm a musician, so I mean, I can go about doing things with music, and it kind of helps. Some people find it extremely difficult to write to music, and especially stuff with dialogue, lyrics, vocals in it. That can really put you off, and it even does to me on and off. So I'm very careful with stuff where there is lyrics in it. But you can certainly use music, be it classical, some of that sort of modern epic electronic music stuff works fine. But do be careful of lyrics, because they can intrude on your thoughts and end up sort of derailing what you're actually thinking. As it is, that's sort of it. I mean, you can take visual prompts any way you like. This is just a little method I use that helps me kick the process off. It's not, I don't know if it's the best method or the worst method. It's just a method I use, and it's been very successful for me. Now, at the end here, I'll tack in a little bit of software stuff that you may want to start looking at if you've not used it before. Scrivener is extremely good because it allows you to develop notes and develop each character in a separate folder. It's all attached to your main work. You do it chapter by chapter, so they're not big, ponderous files that you're having to scroll past hundreds of pages to get to where you need to be. So it lets you compartmentalize all of your work as you're going and track it and have margin notes as you're going, which is extremely good for development. At some stage, you've got to go through the next series of development phases, which is pulling the thing apart and rewriting it and starting to get very, very logical. Also, it's a very good place to start noting continuity things. Continuity is a difficult thing to do because we're in the middle of just throwing our ideas down and having a time of our lives creating sort of all this magical stuff going on. The issue though, however, is you're not careful, you can end up with characters in two places at once, which is, I suppose not so bad. I suppose it's a fantasy epic, but if you're writing a detective murder mystery, having the killer in two places at once is probably not advantageous to the story. So, pro-writing aid. Pro-writing aid, I think, is probably one of the most important things you can add if you're going to have Scrivener. In fact, anything. Pro-writing aid can actually be... There's a wee software attachment called Pro-writing Aid Everywhere, which lets you use it across Microsoft Word, etc. as well. Look, what it does is just very similar to the way Microsoft Word does its spelling and grammatical stuff. However, this is tracking it real time, and it's giving you notes on it. It's going to show you issues in your text as you're moving. This is extremely helpful for speeding up the early editing process and for you not making mistakes when you're first starting to write stuff down. Yeah, I think I've kind of beaten all this to death, and I'm probably going to bore you to tears if I keep going with this end of things. But just take image prompts and start working with them. They're a great way to start getting the creative mind working and developing the world around you. And I will discuss maps and map making and bits and pieces and what software I use to do that very, very soon. Because, that's really cool. It's a fun bit. It's artistic. And honestly, I'm not an artist. My stick figures end up looking like mutants. But there is software that actually allows you to do that. So I'll get on to talking about that in a coming video. Another thing you can do, and this is obvious, and it's a very obvious one, you can treat the world as an image prompt. Now, if you've got the sort of mind that can put somebody into a fantasy world, the reality is you can go to a cafe, have a cup of coffee, note the people around you. This is just basically people and name gathering. You see how they interact with people, And you can take that and their personalities and develop a character out of that as well. I mean, you certainly do it from the people that are around you. I mean, some of my friends are definitely some of the characters in my books. I mean, I know that, absolutely. And I think there's a character called Emma in Neververse Book 1. And she really was a waitress working in a cafe. And to dream to getting out of there. And there's a scene in it whereupon she's cleaning a window. And I mean, I actually wrote that from her actually doing something, cleaning a window on a door, a handprint, and I added that in there. So these little things from life, write them down because they are kind of useful for developing movement of your character and developing sort of a grounding that makes them feel human as opposed to like this two-dimensional thing that seems to be moving around. They have to have depth because the reader has to have attachment to them. There has to be some reason why the reader wants to see this character either, simply survive or thrive or fail. And also there's some lovely little tricks you can do later on by making the reader almost despise a character only to come to love them at the end of a series. Well, that was quite the rant. And I'm not going to do scripts or anything like that. I'm just going to sit here and talk, frankly, straight from my mind about how I do things, and show images and stuff as I'm going. The reason is because, I mean, I also have to write a lot, so I don't have a lot of time to write scripts. So I think what I'm going to do is just give you stuff from my direct experience in doing this. And while I'm only just starting to publish stuff under my own name, the reality is I've done a lot of academic work over many years, and I've developed my writing skills through that, writing short stuff and et cetera, and a lot of, so many exams I've written, it's not funny, and manuals for students to read and work on. So it's where I got the beginnings of my skills to do it. And it sounds kind of unrelated, but writing is writing. Write anything. Write something every day. And that's an important thing to leave you with. Write something. It doesn't have to be good. Nobody ever needs to see it. You just have to do it. Through writing, you just get better and better and better at it. And you have to do it every day. It doesn't matter if it's 500 words, 5,000 words, or 5 words. Just write something.